It's Friday the 21st of October and this is Politics UK, in the week that the Prime Minister succumbed to insurmountable pressure and announced her resignation. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights. I'll be joined by our correspondent in Cardiff and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Sean Curran. On the programme this week, a week of chaos and confusion in Westminster results in this.
I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
The Prime Minister had been under fire all week.
Economic credibility gone. And her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
The new Chancellor spells out the scale of the economic challenge facing the country.
This government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty.
And fury from Mark Drakeford at First Minister's questions.
You think you turn up here this afternoon and claim some sort of moral high ground? What sort of world do you belong in?
Let's begin here at Westminster. Sean, it is probably the most extraordinary week that we've ever experienced in recent years, even by the recent standards of British politics. It's culminated in the resignation again of the Prime Minister. How did we get here?
Well, Liz Truss was in office for 44 days, 44 full days as Prime Minister before she came out in front of Number 10 on Thursday and announced that she was resigning. So that means that she is the shortest serving Prime Minister. The post was created just over 200 years ago. The closest to Liz Truss's record would be George Canning, who managed 119 days in 1827, but he died in office. So she has been forced out largely by her own party. And of course, it has all stemmed really from that very big moment which came after we'd had the period of mourning for the late Queen, when the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, unveiled what was called a mini-budget. And really, since then, the reaction to that, the political turmoil, the financial turmoil, really started the clock ticking, counting down Liz Truss's time in office.
Well, as you say, it was a countdown from the 23rd of September. This time last week, the then Chancellor who unveiled that mini-budget, Kwasi Kwarteng, was sacked. And on Monday, Labour called for the Prime Minister to come to the House of Commons to answer an urgent question on that sacking. What happened?
Yes, day of great drama a week ago with Kwasi Kwarteng being sacked by Liz Truss, having to fly back from Washington, where he'd been at a meeting of the International Monetary Fund. So no great surprise that the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, wanted the Prime Minister to come to the Commons. The Speaker granted him an urgent question. Now, that is great if you're the opposition. That means that the Speaker says, yes, you can force a minister to come to the dispatch box. But it's the government that gets to decide who comes to answer the question. Obviously, Sir Keir Starmer and many other MPs wanted to hear from Liz Truss, but they didn't. Instead, they heard from the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, and she told MPs that Liz Truss couldn't be with them. Now, that didn't stop some pretty fiery exchanges, but it raised lots of questions about what was actually happening with the Prime Minister. Let's take a look.
With apologies to the Leader of the Opposition and the House, the PM is detained on urgent business. I'm afraid you will have to make do with me, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has taken the decision to appoint my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, one of the longest-serving and most experienced parliamentarians, as her Chancellor. Their overriding priority is to restore financial stability in the face of volatile global conditions. We will take whatever tough decisions are necessary and have made changes to the growth plan, which the Chancellor is waiting to update the House on as soon as this urgent question finishes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the Right Honourable Member for Portsmouth North for answering the question put to the Prime Minister. I guess under this Tory government, everybody gets to be Prime Minister for 15 minutes. The country, Mr Speaker, the country is in an economic crisis made in Downing Street. Because they've lost all credibility, government borrowing costs have soared, mortgage rates have ballooned, markets need reassuring. And there is long-term damage that can't be undone. Once you've crashed a car at 100 miles an hour, you've damaged it for good, and you're going to be paying much more on your insurance for years to come. And it's working people who will pay, left wondering if they can afford to stay in their homes if their hopes of owning a home haven't already been crushed. So now it's time for leaders to lead. But where is the Prime Minister? Hiding away, dodging questions, scared of her own shadow. The lady's not for turning up.
The facts are that the global economic conditions that we face have worsened. Now, the opposition may not want to acknowledge that, but that is the truth. Inflation rates have increased around the world, and in the United States are now the highest they've been since 1982. Does my right honourable friend agree that we should always be prepared to make the policy changes we need in the best interests of the people that we represent?
I do agree with my right honourable friend, and that is why the Prime Minister has taken this decision.
The previous Prime Minister shattered the public's trust in the government. The current Prime Minister has trashed the British economy. Meanwhile, Conservative MPs have sat there and let it happen. So for the damage and pain they have caused across our country, will the Leader of the House, on behalf of our whole party, address the people and businesses of our great country and apologise?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. We have made this change for a reason, and I understand that people want certainty and reassurance about their bills, their businesses and their benefits. And I am sorry that the events leading to the changes today have added to the concerns about the major volatility that was already there existing in the economy.
All we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away. Isn't it about time she did and let somebody else who can make decisions in the British national interest get in charge instead?
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the honourable lady. I can assure the House. I can assure the House that she is. With regret, she is not here for a very good reason.
In terms of the national interest, and also to offer further reassurance to the markets, can the Leader of the House just confirm that the Prime Minister will not be taking any decisions on economic policy in the future?
Affection for the honourable lady, and I'm sure the whole House appreciates her question. But the Prime Minister and her Chancellor and her Cabinet will be taking these decisions in the future, and the decision that she has taken over the weekend although personally difficult for her, is the right one for the nation.
Straight after that urgent question, the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, made an emergency financial statement to MPs. What did he say?
Yes, well, this was all very odd. We had there the air of mystery about Liz Truss's whereabouts. Has to be said, the press gallery in the House of Commons is no stranger to rumour and speculation, and there had been some talk that perhaps the Prime Minister had resigned. But actually, even before Penny Mordaunt finished, the Prime Minister came in, smiling at her colleagues, and took her seat on the front bench. And then Jeremy Hunt came in, and they were sitting there together. And then, really, Jeremy Hunt began the job, I suppose, of dismantling everything, or almost everything, that had been announced in the mini-budget. And, of course, in the process of doing that, he was dismantling all of the economic policies that Liz Truss had put forward to Conservative members over the summer, which really formed the basis of her bid for leadership. Her bid for the leadership is, I'm going to do all of these things, Rishi Sunak won't do them. And then, say, in the course of an hour or so at the dispatch box, Jeremy Hunt threw all of those policies overboard.
We are a country that funds our promises and pays our debts. And when that is questioned, as it has been, this government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty. But I give the House and the public this assurance: every single one of those decisions, whether reductions in spending or increases in tax, will be shaped through core, compassionate, Conservative values that will prioritise the needs of the most vulnerable. We've decided on the following changes to support confidence and stability. Firstly, the Prime Minister and I agreed yesterday to reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not been legislated for in Parliament. It is a deeply held Conservative value, a value that I share, that people should keep more of the money they earn, which is why we have continued with the abolition of the health and social care levy. But at a time when markets are asking serious questions about our commitment to sound public finances, we cannot afford a permanent, discretionary increase in borrowing worth £6 billion a year. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely until economic circumstances allow for it to be cut. Taken together with the decision not to cut corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax, the measures I've announced today will raise around £32 billion every year.
As I regularly say now, I welcome the new Chancellor to his place. The fourth in 4 months of chaos and fiasco as this Conservative government spirals down the political plug hole. But the damage has been done. This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, but ordinary working people are paying the price. All that is left after these humiliating U-turns are higher mortgages for working people and higher bonuses for bankers. No one was talking about spending cuts until the Tories crashed the economy with their mini-budget. So I asked the Chancellor, why should the British people pay the economic price for the Tories' mistakes, and what spending cuts does the government plan to make?
If she is preaching today the need for fiscal credibility, which I warmly welcome, can I just tell her this? The true test will be in 2 weeks' time to see whether she supports public spending restraint.
The Chancellor refuses to undo one of the government's biggest injustices: its failure to impose a proper windfall tax on the record profits of the oil and gas companies earned only because Putin is killing innocent Ukrainians. After so many U-turns, surely the Chancellor can persuade the Prime Minister to do one more. Will he introduce a proper windfall tax and help struggling families?
Let me tell the right honourable gentleman, I am not against the principle of taxing profits that are genuine windfalls, but as he will know very well in the energy industry, it is a very cyclical industry, and there are businesses that have periods of feast and famine, and you have to be very careful that you don't tax companies in a way that drives away investment. So we have said that nothing is off the table.
Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor there. Sean, we'll hear more from you later on in the show on how this astonishing week unfolded. But now let's go over to Wales. We can talk to our reporter there, Tulare Glyn-Jones, who's at the Senedd. Tulare, it was also an unusually rowdy and angry session at First Minister's Questions this week.
Absolutely. I have never seen anyone, let alone the First Minister, react so angrily in the chamber. At one point, he was red and shaking with fury. And although he'd started responding quite calmly to the probing of Andrew R.T. Davis, who had some pretty harrowing case studies of people who'd been waiting an awfully long time for an ambulance, the more that he was probed, eventually his emotions took over.
I accept that there are pressures across the United Kingdom, but the issue here in Wales is particularly acute. Now, what I want to leave this chamber understanding is what the roadmap from the Welsh Government is as we go further into the winter months to alleviate these problems so that Aneurin Bevan will not be turning in his grave and a government that is responsible for the health service has a solution to the problems that Mr Morris and other families are feeling day in, day out.
Well, so the prescription of the Welsh Government is to invest more money in the ambulance service, to have more staff working in the ambulance service, to have a wider range of people able to provide those services, and for ambulances to know that when they arrive at hospitals, that the hospital will be in a position to receive that patient so that the ambulance can get back on the road again and attend in a timely way to other people who are waiting. That is the prescription of the Welsh Government. What do people who work in the service, and as I say, they'll have heard the way that the members describe the service they provide this afternoon. What do they face? He has chosen to use that language this afternoon. He didn't, and you have chosen to use that language here this afternoon. And what do those people face? They face cuts to their pay because of the policy of your government. And now they face cuts to the budget that the health service itself will have at its disposal. It is shocking. It is absolutely shocking to me that you think that you can turn up here this afternoon with a mess that your party has made to the budget of this country, to the reputation of this country around the world, that you promise those people that there will be more to come, and you think you turn up here this afternoon and claim some sort of moral high ground. What sort of world do you belong in?
Extraordinary outburst by any measure, but really goes to show the pressure that the First Minister is under at the moment, because there are legitimate questions to be asked about the performance of the Welsh NHS and the Welsh Ambulance Service. The Welsh Government would say that they're facing the same pressures as elsewhere in the United Kingdom. COVID backlogs and problems with staff recruitment and retention. But there is this palpable sense of fear amongst Welsh ministers about the scale of the cuts, the financial cuts that are coming down the line from Westminster and the impact that will have on their attempts to tackle these problems.
Tulare, what was the official response then from the Welsh Finance Minister?
Yes, Rebecca Evans made a statement after this outburst, after First Minister's questions, and her assessment was quite grim.
I fear the Chancellor's statement yesterday signalled a new era of austerity. Even before any prospective spending cuts with the Chancellor's planned efficiency exercise, inflation has already significantly eroded our devolved budget settlement. Over the current 3-year spending period, our budget will be worth up to £4 billion less in real terms than it was when it was set last year. Next year alone, it will be worth £1.5 billion less. Decisions taken on where to wield the axe on public spending in Whitehall will have a material impact for our budget in Wales.
I'm acutely aware that the past few weeks have been, to put it very lightly, disappointing. Whilst publicly I may have defended some of the previously announced proposals, I did so believing that the UK government had modelled the impacts of its plans.
This mess shows once again the extent to which we here in Wales are just at the mercy of the whims of Westminster. Ministers, it underlines again how the current devolution settlement leaves us effectively fiscally impotent.
Interestingly, Conservative MS Peter Fox there was one of the first Tory MSs to put considerable distance, publicly at least, between himself and Liz Truss. And now, of course, it remains to be seen what impact the new Prime Minister and a potentially new economic plan will have on the budget of the Welsh Government.
Indeed. And there was an admission by another government minister that their house-building ambitions are under threat this week too. What was said?
Yes, Julie James, the Climate Change Minister, said their plans to build 20,000 homes is hanging by a thread. She's the Climate Change Minister, but her portfolio does include housing.
It is hanging by a thread, our ability to build 20,000 low-carbon homes. We are almost certainly facing the worst cuts we have ever seen right across public services. Although, if your government saw fit to actually announce it at the same time as they announced the mess that they had, we would know already. But how you can ask me that question, divorced from the macroeconomic situation, I just cannot imagine.
Minister, I am not here to scrutinise your performance over the last few weeks, but I am here to scrutinise and challenge the performance of a Welsh Labour government over 23 years that has failed consistently, year on year, to build the right number of houses.
Janet Finch-Saunders there having absolutely none of it from Julie James. So I think there's a real theme to this week's contribution. The tension from Westminster, that febrile atmosphere really spilling over here to Cardiff Bay. That sense of fear over the scale of the cuts incoming down the line due to the economic situation. The Welsh Government put the blame squarely at the feet of Liz Truss, and the Welsh Conservatives, completely rejecting that narrative, saying to Welsh Labour, you've been in power here for more than 20 years. These problems are your making.
Indeed, those tensions on full display this week in the Senate. Thank you very much to Larry Glyn-Jones there in the Senate. Let's return to Westminster. Our correspondent Sean Curran. Sean, let's go back to the extraordinary week that has unfolded almost hour by hour. I mean, it's an understatement to say that the Prime Minister was under huge pressure. And amid speculation about her future, Liz Truss had to come to the dispatch box for only the third time in Prime Minister's questions and face Keir Starmer and her own backbenchers.
Yes, it would be fair to say that the storm clouds had gathered by Wednesday when the Prime Minister had to come to the Commons. The 19th of October, a very significant date for the Conservative Party. If you've ever wondered why we talk about the 1922 committee, it's because on the 19th of October 1922, Conservative MPs gathered at the Carlton Club not far from here and decided that they would break the coalition that the Tories had with Lloyd George. So Lloyd George was out as Prime Minister, and the Conservative leader of the time, Austen Chamberlain, well, he was out too. So an interesting day for the Prime Minister to be under so much pressure. The House of Commons was packed. MPs had been under orders to be there because there was a big vote coming up later on. It is fair to say there was a lot of unhappiness on the Conservative benches. They stayed quiet. It was a noisy session, but a lot of that noise was coming from opposition MPs who were jeering the Tory backbenchers opposite. We'd had that frustration from Labour. They'd wanted to talk to Liz Truss about the sacking of the Chancellor at the start of the week. Now they were going to talk to her. But of course, it had all moved on, and they were now really talking about her future.
A book is being written about the Prime Minister's time in office. Apparently, it's going to be out by Christmas. Is that the release date or the title?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been in office for just under 2 months, and I have delivered the energy price guarantee, making sure that people aren't paying £6,000 bills this winter. I've reversed the national insurance increase, and I've also taken steps, and we will be taking steps, to crack down on the militant unions. Now, what, Mr. Speaker? I think, Mr. Speaker, that is more of a record of action than the honourable gentleman in his 2.5 years in the job.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister stood there and promised absolutely no spending reductions. They all cheered. This week, the Chancellor announced a new wave of cuts. What's the point of a Prime Minister whose promises don't even last a week?
Prime Minister. Well, I can assure the right honourable gentleman that spending will go up next year and it will go up the year after. But of course, we need to get value for taxpayers' money. The Labour Party has pledged hundreds of billions of spending pledges, none of which they've retracted. The honourable gentleman needs to reflect the economic reality in his policies.
Mr. Speaker, those spending cuts are on the table for one reason and one reason only, because they crashed the economy. And working people are going to have to pay 500 quid more a month on their mortgages. And what's the Prime Minister's response? To say she's sorry. What does she think people will think and say? That's all right, I don't mind financial ruin. At least she apologised.
Prime Minister. I do think there has to be some reflection of economic reality from the party opposite. The fact is that interest rates are rising across the world and the economic conditions have worsened. And we are being honest. We're levelling with the public, unlike the honourable gentleman who simply won't do it. And what is the honourable gentleman doing about the fact that train workers are again going on strike?
Mr. Speaker, she's asking me questions because we're a government in waiting and they're an opposition in waiting. There's no getting away from this. Millions of people are facing horrendous mortgage repayments. And she's admitted it's her fault. She shouldn't have conducted an economic experiment on the British public. But it's not just her. They put her there. They're keeping her there. Why on earth would anyone trust the Tories with the economy ever again?
I notice, Mr. Speaker, he's not actually objecting to a single economic policy that the Chancellor announced on Monday. He's refusing to condemn the strikers. We're on the side of working people. We're going to legislate to make sure we keep our railways open. The honourable gentleman refuses to do anything.
Here's Starbuck. Mr. Speaker, the only mandate she's ever had is from members opposite. It was a mandate built on fantasy economics and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party. I've got the list here. 45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Tax-free shopping, gone. Economic credibility, gone. And her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
After 10 U-turns in 2 weeks, we're left with a Prime Minister in office, but not in power, and families are paying through the teeth for her mistakes. Her latest broken promise has put pensioners in the front line of Tory cuts. So, can the Prime Minister perhaps turn to her Chancellor right now, get permission to make another U-turn and commit to raising the state pension at the rate of inflation?
Prime Minister. I honestly don't know what the honourable gentleman is talking about, because we have been clear in our manifesto that we will maintain the triple lock, and I am completely committed to it. So is the Chancellor.
I mean, Ian Blackford was slightly sort of knocked off guard, wasn't he, with that response?
He was. Now, to be fair to Ian Blackford, it was extremely noisy in the House of Commons. There are exchanges that we've just played there, which when you were sitting in the Commons, in the press gallery, you couldn't actually hear all of them. So it was extremely noisy. But actually, He stood up and he carried on with his attack, and he accused Liz Truss of having thrown pensioners under the bus. And she then actually had her best moment of Prime Minister's questions, and it was probably the best moment for the Tory benches behind her when she stood up and said, oh, he can't take yes for an answer. And that was a moment of uniting the Tory party, really. For the first moment in that Prime Minister's questions, they were there cheering on the Prime Minister. But of course, that announcement in itself was significant because on the Tuesday, all the indications from the government had been that there'd be no commitment at all about increasing pensions in line with inflation. And then we are told the Prime Minister and the Chancellor had a meeting on Wednesday morning, and then she came and announced it in the Commons during PMQs.
So Liz Truss survived that Prime Minister's questions. Painful, but she survived it. It was in the afternoon during the Opposition Day debate and motion on fracking that turned into a confidence issue in the government. What happened?
Well, a lot happened on Wednesday. Straight after Prime Minister's questions, we were told, the journalists at Westminster were told, that the Prime Minister would be going off to visit an electronics factory. And then we were told that that visit was cancelled, and she came back to the Commons. And as we now know, that was because the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was going to resign. But bubbling beneath all of that, or around all of that, was this huge row. Conservative MPs were under orders to be at Westminster because the government whips, the people who organise party discipline, wanted them to vote down a Labour motion. Labour had got the business for the day, and they'd put down a motion that would be familiar to anybody who followed all the twists and turns of Brexit. They were going to take over the parliamentary timetable in November in order to pass a bill that would ban fracking in England. Fracking, a hugely controversial subject across all the parties. It was something that the 2019 manifesto had said there won't be any fracking until all the scientific evidence changes. A lot of Conservative MPs are not keen on fracking, particularly not if it's going to be in their constituency. They'd already asked for lots of reassurances that it wouldn't take place unless local people agreed. So a lot of them feeling very unhappy about this whole situation because they could see that if they voted the way their whips wanted them to, they could be accused of having missed the opportunity to ban fracking. So a very emotionally charged debate with a massive sting in the tail.
This is about faith in politics. The government is seeking to break its manifesto promise without even getting the consent of this House. Today, we give all members a chance to make this crucial decision on fracking.
I, like many of my colleagues, are not in favour of fracking and would like us to maintain our manifesto commitment. But he also knows that by playing party political games this afternoon, there is no way that we could vote for his motion. Is he more interested in genuinely opposing fracking, or is he actually more interested in playing party political games and trying to score points on this really important issue?
He should be directing his point to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Secretary of State. He was explicitly asked on the radio last week, will he give the House a binding vote on this issue? And I think the case for it is massively strengthened by the fact that the party opposite is breaking its manifesto promise. He said no. And we are forcing this debate because it is the only way we can give the House a binding vote on this issue.
In terms of trust, he will know that the government set up this new consultation to determine what public consent is. Would you agree with me that it is a monstrous waste of time and money to try to determine something that doesn't exist? There is no local consent for this. The government itself, plenty of them don't actually want it. If he really wants to know what consent is, why doesn't he have a general election?
The genius minds of the government whip's office are now seeking to turn a vote on this important issue into a vote of confidence in the current Prime Minister. Mr. Deputy Speaker, picture the scene. The government whip's office, confronted with a vote on fracking, one of the least popular causes in the country, the government falling apart around them. They could decide to retreat, but that will be yet another U-turn. They could concede a vote of this House on the fracking ban, but they would lose, and fracking would be dead. And then at the 11th hour, one galaxy brain says the way to force it through is to make it a vote not just on one of the most unpopular causes in the country, fracking, but the most unpopular cause in the country. The current Prime Minister. You might call it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the frack me or sack me strategy.
We will consult on the mechanism, but I can assure the House
that any process of evidencing local support must be independent rather than directly by the companies themselves, and if evidence of the appropriate local support for any development is insufficient, that development should not proceed. Local communities will have a veto.
Quite clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a confidence vote, but it is an attempt by Her Majesty's. It is obviously, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a confidence vote. What it is an attempt. What it is an attempt. Let me try.
Order. I really do need to press him on this issue of a confidence vote, because many of us have been told today by our whips that if we vote or abstain from voting against this motion, we will lose the whip. So could he please confirm whether that is the case or not?
I thank the Honourable...
We have to hear the answer. Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that question, and that is a matter for party managers, and I'm not a party manager. Madam
Order coming. Sergeant, please. Will the Sergeant please investigate the delay in the no lobby?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would urge you to launch an investigation into the scenes outside the entrance to the no lobby earlier. As you know, members are expected to be able to vote without fear or favour.
Yes.
And the behaviour code, which is agreed by the whole of the House, says that there shall never be bullying or harassment of members. I saw members being physically manhandled into another lobby and being bullied.
While crying.
If we want to stand up against bullying in this House of our staff, we have to stop bullying in this chamber as well, don't we?
Well, in the end, the government won the vote comfortably. In fact, actually, they won by more than their nominal majority. But there is this row going on about what might have happened in the division lobbies. We heard Chris Bryant there. On Thursday morning, the Speaker said he'd asked senior parliamentary officials to investigate what had happened. We should say that ministers have denied that there was any manhandling or pushing or anything like that. But obviously there's now going to be an investigation into the events of Wednesday night. But of course, that wasn't the end of the confusion. We saw Wendy Morton there, the government chief whip, taking her seat at the end when Graham Stewart was speaking. And we had a little bit of confusion on Wednesday night going into the early hours of Thursday morning when we thought she might have resigned, until we were told at about 1:30 on Thursday morning that in fact she had not.
Well, all the chaos on Wednesday did seem to trigger what then unfolded on Thursday.
Yep. Thursday morning, we started to get a pretty steady flow of Tory MPs saying that they thought that Liz Truss had to go. And then at lunchtime, we were told there would be a statement from the Prime Minister and it would take place in Downing Street. And I think pretty well resignation was pretty firmly on the cards in everybody's mind then.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this. We delivered on energy bills and on cutting national insurance. And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party. This morning I met the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
We'll talk about what happens next in just a moment, but fill us in, Sean, on what's been going on in the House of Lords.
Yeah, in all the excitement, you might have missed the fact that a list of 26 new members of the Lords was published last week, and it's fair to say that it hasn't gone down well with the current occupants of the posh end of the Palace of Westminster.
The all-party committee I set up when I was Lord Speaker under Lord Burns in 2016 proposed a maximum for the House of Lords of 600 members. The latest list brings the total not to 600 but to 825, with resignation honours still to come. But also on this occasion, the system has enabled the appointment of a new peer who had quite falsely attacked a distinguished member of this House as a paedophile. Surely there is no reason why an individual who makes such an untrue allegation should be rewarded by a peerage.
This particular appointment is a matter for the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, to answer for in terms of nominating the individual that Lord Fowler has referred to.
Let's look at the facts over the last few years. David Cameron appointed more peers per year than any other Prime Minister ever, with a far greater proportion to the government parties, and then Boris Johnson made him look like an amateur. With the talk of another list about to be sent our way, courtesy of this Prime Minister's resignation list, don't know if there'll be any further ones, is it just time now just to stop, to pause and have a genuine discussion about a sensible way forward?
Yeah. I think on the last point, I would point out that it is a long-standing convention that individuals can be nominated for an honour in recognition of their public and political service, and that Prime Ministers can draw up resignation lists, for example, after leaving office. And this, of course, has been the case under past governments right across the political spectrum. And I would point out on the numbers that after a long period of Labour government, there were very substantial numbers of Labour peers. The Conservative voice in this House is still underrepresented and has been for some time.
My recollection of the negotiations of post-97 to 99 is that there was a general agreement that there should not be a majority for any group in this House, and that this House should have a different composition than the House of Commons. I understood the Minister to be arguing that this House should have the same composition as the House of Commons. In the not unlikely event that a different government appears after the next election, how does the Minister suggest her preference for a majority for the government should be achieved?
What we have to do now is make sure that we're refreshing the House with new people from right across the House. There are opposition as well as government peers on this list, and I welcome that and look forward to working with the new peers.
So that was the House of Lords. Let's return to the resignation of the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. What happens now?
So we know from Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, that they expect there's going to be a new Prime Minister within a week, a new Conservative leader within a week. He also says that he'd like to have the members involved. Now, what will we see? Will we see rounds and rounds of MPs voting? Possibly, because we don't know exactly how many candidates there'll be. But of course, we did have that situation in 2016 when Theresa May became Prime Minister, that actually it didn't go to a full election because the other candidate, Andrea Leadsom, dropped out. So we might see what is often called a coronation, but it looks like that next week will be Liz Truss's fourth and final Prime Minister's questions.
Sean Curran, thank you very much. That's all we have time for Politics UK this week, in what's been another remarkable week in politics. I'll be back with you on BBC Two at 12:15 on Monday with Politics Live.